hasn't been easy. Good, bad, or indifferent, it was worth it. Throughout my journey, I had so many inspirations, so many things that made me see things in a different light, even view myself from a different perspective, understanding that I don't have to be just another statistic, that I can seek to be who I want to be, not who they set out for me to be. With that being said, this is my response to the legendary Pedro Petri's Puerto Rican obituary, Puerto Rican resurrection. Hold up, what's going on? We've let too much time pass. It's been going on for far too long, struggling just to survive. Things seem so wrong. We worked, we were always on time. We were never late, just trying to survive. If it wasn't for Juan, Miguel, Milagro, Olga, Manuel, I would still be in denial. All dying for an American dream, waiting for their lottery numbers to hit, the promotion that never came and a system that never gave a fuck from the beginning. So understanding and learning everything they struggled through, why do we continue to keep the cycle going? While screaming, yo soy boricua, pa que tú lo sepa. Please tell me, what good does that do if we continue to contribute to the system that has us where we're at? And I'm not saying you gotta be the next Captain Puerto Rico, I'm not saying all that. But let's look at the facts. So from 1493 until 1898, Spain ruled the island of Borinquen. And within that time, we'd had massive genocide. So many people died on both sides. And what do I mean by both sides? Our Afro and Taino side that we could never deny because we hold with so much pride everything they went through just to survive, while the conquistadors took the whole island on a ride, committing so many criminal acts that words can never describe. 1898, here comes big old Tío Sam, el savior de Puerto Rico, decreasing the currency by 40%. Cause who needs to survive when you got Tío Sam's checks by your side? Can't forget about the imposement of citizenship, forcing us to rely, while Tío Sam takes a ride on the road of taxation without representation, and that comes with a lot of exploitation. Oh, what a great nation of which we reside. But what I realize, if you remove us from history, we don't see a future. This is why it's important to understand who is Pedro Avisu Campos, who is Arturo Alfonso Chambra, who is Lolita Lebron, who is Ramon Emeterio Betances, who is Mariana Bracetti, who are the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party, who are the Young Lords. All representation of greatness, all in their own right. But we are them and they are us, fighting for the same cause, liberation, self-determination, with no limitations. So we won't be dying, hating the make-believe steaks or the bulletproof rice and beans, or waiting for the supervisor to die to get that promotion. We will die freeing our bodies without having to use physical strength, but by arming ourselves with knowledge and education, not just for now, but for the future. Viva Puerto Rico libre. Pa'lante, siempre pa'lante. Salute, salute, salute. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back, welcome back. Happy to be here with you guys this afternoon. We're going to pick up where we left off yesterday. We are going over Puerto Rico, a national history. This is part 2. We're going to try to get a couple of chapters in today, so that way we can add to our little library of knowledge down in YouTube. So don't forget, everybody on TikTok, we are live on YouTube, and everybody on YouTube, we are live on TikTok. So without further ado, just do me a favor. If this is your first time here, I do believe in socialism, free education, free housing, and free healthcare. So by tapping the screen and sharing this live, it's just giving me a little socialist love and support to be able to get the message out to the masses. Salute to everybody tapping in. Peace, love, positivity. Let's get it started.
Chapter 3. Revolutionary Winds. From Reform to Revolution. During the first 2 centuries of Spanish colonization in the Americas, Puerto Rico was ruled with an iron fist. Spain created viceroys to control vast territories across the Americas that extended from modern-day Patagonia to Alaska. There were important exceptions, of course. Puerto Rico was not part of a viceroyalty. The Portuguese also claimed the territories of Brazil, while European empires clashed in the Caribbean as they sought to expand their sugar-producing markets or their spheres of influence. Puerto Rico was of military importance to the Spanish crown.
Listen.
But the people who inhabited the archipelago were an afterthought. For those in the working classes, life in the colony was difficult. Contraband was officially banned as the state promoted trade through official channels. But reality was very different on the ground. People illegally traded with sailors on ships that flew different imperial flags, French, Dutch, or English. The ship's flag color didn't matter if its cargo brought much-needed provisions. Those ships carried supplies, but they also transported ideas. These were very dangerous to colonial administrators. The 18th century was a time of transformation for the Spanish Empire. After the War of Succession, 1701 to 14, the House of Bourbon took over the Spanish crown and issued a series of reforms meant to oil the imperial bureaucratic machine Spain had created in the Americas. The power of the church was curtailed, contraband would be punished, and the state's administrative control centralized, among other things. Social hierarchies anchored in race and gender were important for the functioning of the Spanish colonial apparatus. And when enslaved peoples got together and declared a revolution in the neighboring colony of Saint Domingue, it set Puerto Rico's colonial authorities and planter class on edge. Saint Domingue, later named Haiti, was the most profitable colony in the world by the late 18th century.
Listen.
A possession of the French Empire, it produced enough sugar to satisfy the world. That enormous wealth, however, was produced on the backs and through the exploitation of black peoples. In 1789, Saint Domingue was inhabited by 32,000 white people, 55,000 people of color, and almost 450,000 enslaved people. The number of enslaved people may have been higher since they were considered chattel and often inaccurately counted in censuses by planters trying to evade taxes. What began as an enslaved insurrection in 1791 quickly became a revolution that produced the second independent nation of the Americas and the first black republic in the world.
Listen.
For anthropologist Michel Rolf-Trujillo, the Haitian Revolution was unthinkable because Europeans could not fathom the idea that enslaved peoples had the capacity to organize a revolution. But what took place in Haiti in 1791 occurred regardless of what Europeans thought, wanted, or desired. Perhaps that is why it remains powerful. The revolution may have happened on the fringes of Europe, but it reshaped Western modernity. Enslaved people who were considered chattel rather than human beings, writes historian Laurent Dubois, successfully insisted that they had the right to be free, and secondly, that they had the right to govern themselves according to a new set of principles. In the process, they propelled the Enlightenment principles of universalism forward in unexpected ways by insisting on the self-evident, but then largely denied the principle that no one should be a slave. After the revolution, Haiti came to signify different things to different people. It was a ghost that haunted white elites in the colonies and imperial metropolis. For those enslaved, Haiti became a glimmer of hope. Revolts proliferated throughout the Caribbean, and it was not uncommon to find drawings of Haiti's revolutionary leaders like Henri Christophe and Toussaint Louverture among the belongings of those captured. The Haitian Revolution was part of a broader revolutionary moment that swept the Atlantic world. In the United States, insurgents successfully created an independent country in their 1776 revolution. The people of France overthrew the monarchy and created a republican government in a revolution that began in 1789. 2 years later, the first shots of the Haitian Revolution were fired. As Laurent Dubois has noted, the French and Haitian revolutions emerged symbiotically as news, ideologies, and people crisscrossed the Atlantic as actors in the Caribbean deployed the ideals and symbols of republicanism and pushed the meaning of citizenship and national belonging in new directions. These ideas posed an enormous threat to the Spanish crown and its colonial possessions across the Americas. In less than 2 decades, revolution became inevitable in many Spanish colonial possessions. Because of its geographic location, Puerto Rico was at the center of the storm. Between colonial reform and imperial crisis. In the 18th century, European wars created a ripple effect across the Atlantic world. During France's Revolutionary Wars, Napoleon Bonaparte excelled as a military strategist and politician. In 1799, he seized power and created a bureaucratic and dictatorial government. Shortly after, in 1803, he began a series of military attacks and conflicts later known as the Napoleonic Wars, which lasted until 1815. These had huge repercussions throughout the territories we know today as Latin America and the Caribbean. It was a time of revolutionary fervor and the expansion of Enlightenment ideas. The American and French revolutions inspired fear in European monarchical systems. The call for liberté, égalité, fraternité was a powerful slogan that mobilized people to demand rights and to challenge monarchical systems of government by insisting on popular sovereignty. In 1807, Portugal went against France's wishes to close its ports and declare war on England, its old ally. Napoleon Bonaparte seized an opportunity to attack Portugal. Prince João fled to Brazil, along with the Portuguese crown, moving the center of the empire's gravity from Lisbon to Rio de Janeiro. Napoleon sought to strike a deal with Charles IV and his son Prince Fernando to allow his army to cross Spain in order to invade Portugal. On May 2nd, 1808, as his forces marched to Madrid, Napoleon declared war on Spain, forcing the king and prince into exile in France. The Spanish courts moved from Madrid to Cadiz to resist the Napoleonic invasion. This created dueling seats of power in Spain between José Bonaparte, colloquially known as Pepe Botella, Pepe Bottle, because of his drinking habits, as the representative of the Napoleonic Empire, and the Regency, which became a symbol of Spanish monarchical resistance. While the Portuguese crown held a strong grip on Brazil, these events immediately created a crisis of legitimacy for Spain in its colonies. Factions emerged in Spanish America that wanted to maintain their loyalty to the crown, while others saw the moment as an opportunity to create new sovereign nations. From 1808 to 1826, revolutionary movements spread like wildfire in Spanish America, leading to the independence of Spain's former colonies, except for Cuba and Puerto Rico. Both the Napoleonic government and the Spanish Regency sent emissaries to their American colonies to garner support. When the French arrived in Puerto Rico, Governor Toribio Montes arrested them and put them in the gallows at San Juan's Morro fortifications. He also sent a message of loyalty to Spain. Meanwhile, the Puerto Rican elite, then composed of white planters of European descent, were engaged in fiery debates about how to best proceed.
Listen.
Amid the political tensions between liberals and conservatives in the Cadiz courts, the Regency allowed representatives from its American colonies to join them in the royal courts. In May 1809, elections were called for the first time in Puerto Rico's history to select a representative. At that time, the archipelago was divided into 5 cabildos, or administrative councils. San Juan, San Germán, Aguada, Arecibo, and Coamo. Each cabildo chose 5 candidates, whose names were then forwarded to the Provincial Electoral Board in San Juan. The board was composed of the governor, the bishop, and the member of the San Juan Cabildo. After tense conversations, the cabildos elected a Navy lieutenant educated in Spain and France, Ramón Power y Giralt. The cabildos oversaw the creation of a document containing instrucciones for Puerto Rico's first representative in the Spanish courts. All stated their loyalty to the monarchy, and then proceeded to complain about Spain's oppressive, arbitrary, and tyrannical rule, and suggest a series of reforms. These included the creation of a University of Puerto Rico with campuses in San Juan and San Germán, more schools, the abolition of onerous taxes, and labor reforms. The San Germán Cabildo went further and proclaimed that if Spain fell into French hands, this island shall be independent and free to choose the best way to conserve and to maintain the peace and Christian religion of its inhabitants. That Puerto Ricans understood their struggle as part of other independence movements is often minimized by historians. And in the context of the wars for independence in Spanish America, the San Germán Cabildo was echoing a sentiment perhaps more generalized than has been documented. The town of San Germán had a long history of protesting the colonial government, stretching back to the 18th century. In addition, several members of the local criollo elite, as Puerto Ricans of European descent were called, were known to be separatists. In fact, the same year that Ramón Power y Giralt was elected to the Spanish courts, Francisco Antonio Ramírez de Arellano, a prominent member of the town's elite who had served as mayor, was secretly organizing an armed uprising to take place during the 1811 Christmas celebrations in San Germán. The planned insurrection was halted a few days prior to its scheduled date because the rebels received information that a Spanish ship had arrived in Puerto Rico with 4,000 troops. What they didn't know was that the ship carried just 400 soldiers, who were actually destined for Mexico and Venezuela to fight against independentistas there. News of the planned uprising eventually reached Governor Salvador Meléndez-Bruno, who launched an investigation on January 21st, 1812. While charges were eventually dropped against those arrested or accused, the list of those involved included prominent members of San Germán's elite. The governor's fears about a possible rebellion were heightened by the appearance of leaflets and posters advocating for independence. Flyers arguing that no Puerto Rican would be sent to Venezuela to fight their brothers struggling for independence floated through the streets of San Germán. The authorities also believed that separatists in Puerto Rico were being protected by powerful people, including Ramón Power y Giralt and the first Puerto Rican-born bishop, Juan Alejo de Arismendi. In 1823, when the Regency once again repealed the Constitution and gave colonial governors absolute power to rule as they saw fit, the government's repressive apparatus was tightened. The move was heavily contested by colonial representatives in the courts and later abolished. In Puerto Rico, separatists were not the only group to be feared. The ghost of Haiti haunted government officials, and a series of enslaved revolts heightened those fears. 4 years after the Haitian Revolution,
Remember, the United States is not a factor right now. We're talking about the early 1800s. Right now, they're discussing the conflict between France and Spain right now, and what's the outcome and what could happen if either side either win or loses.
Peoples attempted an insurrection.
Let's tap this screen, share this live. And for everybody on TikTok, we are also live on YouTube. So if you missed yesterday's first couple of chapters, you can always go back on Afro Taino 88 on YouTube and go listen up and catch up on the content we already previously listened to. And you can catch up what you missed today. Tap that screen, share this live. Let's keep it going.
town of Aguadilla. While the insurrection failed, it instilled panic about Haiti's influence in Puerto Rico. Following the Peace of Basel in 1795, when Spain declared peace with the French and restarted commerce between the two countries, articles alluding to the French Revolution began circulating in Spanish America.
And this is where I ended off my talk yesterday when we was ending out the last chapters. This is where you start seeing Puerto Rico more locked down, where they try to isolate and seclude Puerto Rico from the influences of the Haitian revolutions and the other revolutions going on around them. So start listening to this in detail.
Governor Ramon de Castro prohibited French imports to Puerto Rico.
Listen.
He also ordered local authorities to closely monitor foreigners, particularly those of French ancestry.
Remember I said yesterday they had their own form of like their own carpetas, their own COINTELPRO at this time. It's not labeled that, obviously, but it's their form of keeping track of who's coming in, who's coming out, who's who, what's what they're a part of, who they're connected to. So keep in mind, intelligence has always been there.
Colonial fears once again came to the fore in 1805, when authorities reported that a Haitian agent named Cholet was traveling through Puerto Rico. Governor Toribio Montes sent a notice to all of the island's lieutenants about his arrival and described him as an 18 to 20-year-old mulatto versed in English, French, and Spanish. He ended the notice by ordering his capture before he spills his damn seed in this island that enjoys loyalty and...
No disrespect, but this is the book that I decided to put on today. I mean, you're more than welcome to put whatever book you want on your platform. I don't go into anybody's room telling them, seriously, are you doing this? Like, I'm not that entitled. So I'm really not throwing shade, but like, this is an educational platform, and this is what I decided to put up on my, platform today.
He was never captured, and it was later learned that he had been sent by Haitian General Jean-Jacques Dessalines to advocate for insurrection and revolution, not only in Puerto Rico, but throughout the Caribbean. During the Napoleonic occupation of the Iberian Peninsula, Spain became, for the first time in its history, a constitutional monarchy. In 1812, the Cádiz courts approved its first constitution, colloquially known as La Pepa, which recognized for the first time in Spanish America's colonial history that Spaniards on both sides of the Atlantic were citizens of the Spanish nation, not subjects.
Yeah, everybody in the comments, please do me a favor. Don't feel the need to defend me, because there's a lot of people who follow me just to critique me. There's a lot of critics out there, and not enough people actually teaching their people. And I don't throw shade at people, I swear I don't, but it's a bad habit that we have in our own communities, that we like to tear down people that's trying to do something for our people. I don't want nobody to respond. Please, let's focus on this book. Let's focus on the knowledge and education, because that only distracts us from what we're trying to get to from point A to point B. Like I said, please, a lot of people follow me just to do shit like that.
The Constitution was revoked in 1814, when King Fernando VII returned to the throne after expelling Napoleon's forces. With political tensions running high, the Spanish crown re-established the Constitution twice, only to abolish it again in 1823. The news of the Constitution arrived in Puerto Rico on July 9, 1812. A year earlier, the courts had approved legislation known as the Power Laws, in reference to Puerto Rico's colonial representative, Ramón Power y Giralt. These laws allowed the opening of ports in different coastal towns, thereby abolishing San Juan's port monopoly, authorized the free import of flour, and eased some taxes. Governor Meléndez disliked the politics that were beginning to operate in Spain, but nonetheless declared the 1812 Constitution in force. Great celebrations took place in different parts of the island. Rumors circulated among the San Juan enslaved population that following the French and the British, the Spanish courts had also abolished slavery, but local officials were not complying. Authorities were informed about a planned insurrection that was never confirmed. The rumors gave the colonial government an excuse to accuse and arrest dozens. These events offered the government carte blanche to conduct state-sponsored terror, exploitation, and violence. Reform, repression, and revolution.
Tap, 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 tap,
After
tap.
Fernando VII abolished the Spanish Constitution in 1814, the situation in the Americas continued to worry his administration. It was in Spain's best interest to offer Puerto Rico reforms in hopes of keeping the colonial administration loyal to the crown. Revolutionary winds were blowing through the Creole elite as the appearance of leaflets and posters made abundantly clear to authorities.
And for me, if you ask my opinion, this book is very important so we can see the contributions and the intersectionalities between all the revolutions and all of our suppressions and all of our connections. Even under, like I said, what really got me into this book is hearing Puerto Rico's connection to all the other movements around them and how they were suppressed from even contributing to other movements. So when I go back in my history Rolodex and I'm like, damn, there's a gap right here. Why is there a gap? It's because there's a historical element there that's not talked about. And not for nothing to highlight the Haitian Revolution, which inspired 90% of the revolutions at that time. It's important. It's our neighbor. It's our family. Like, things like this aren't given in other books. This is why it's to understand our national history. If people don't like the author, that's on them. I don't know. Sometimes we don't know how to take what we need and leave the rest. You know what I mean? Like, there's certain books that I read even on philosophy and ideology where I may not 100% agree with everything in the book, but I know there's certain elements in there that I could use or it could be applied to whatever it is that we're trying to do here. I don't claim to be the end all be all, but this is why I say I like to open my mind when it comes to knowledge and education, because we can't be one-track thinkers. That's what causes a lot of division within our community.
In October 1814, King Fernando asked the San Juan Cabildo to send a list of potential reforms. The next year, he issued the Cédula de Gracias, a decree that granted a series of social and economic reforms to Puerto Rico for a period of 15 years, unless extended by subsequent decrees. The Cédula de Gracias sought to move Puerto Rico from subsistence to a plantation economy, one capable of exporting its agricultural production. To that end, the decree alleviated taxes and restrictions on migration. The reforms worked. As historian Olga Jiménez de Wagenheim has noted, although there is no statistical breakdown of how many immigrants the Cédula attracted to Puerto Rico, there is evidence that between 1815 and 1834, the island's population grew by 38%, or 138,000.
Listen, really quick, for everybody on TikTok, we don't know where TikTok is going to be by next month, so we are also live streaming on YouTube, Afro-Taino88, so you can go in the live section, you can go listen to some of the other books. We got War Against All Puerto Ricans, we have the Huey P. Newton Reader, and now we have this book. I've done several books on this platform, but this is the first time that I'm actually doing a digital archive on YouTube where you guys can just go back and listen on your own time and get the knowledge and education free from me to you. But let's tap that screen, let's keep it going, let's finish up this chapter. We got 21 minutes left of this chapter.
The island's population also grew exponentially throughout the century, from 155,426 in 1800 to 953,243 in 1897. This demographic explosion was due to a higher natality rate, migration caused by the Haitian Revolution, 1791 to 1804, and the Spanish-American Wars of Independence, 1808 to 33, and the slave trade. In 1819, the value per capita of exported products was 1,098,083 pesos, and by 1844, it had reached 6,204,704. Puerto Rico began massively exporting coffee, tobacco, and sugar. In that triad, sugar became king. Its production, however, depended on the uninterrupted continuation of the system of chattel slavery.
Listen.
Under pressure from the British, the Spanish crown signed the Anglo-Spanish Treaty in 1814, promising to limit the slave trade in their colonies.
Really quick. This is for the comments, for anybody in the comments below. Could anybody tell me the year that Puerto Rico abolished slavery? Let's make it fun, right? Let's engage with the audience. Do we know the year Puerto Rico finally abolished slavery? On paper, I'm not talking about full practice, because we know how that shit works, right? When they abolish something, it takes a little time for people to really put it into practice. But on paper, what year did they abolish slavery?
This treaty became a dead letter as Puerto Rico saw the growth of its enslaved population from 13,333 in 1802 to 51,265 in 1846. During that same period, there were at least 25 rebellions, insurrections, or conspiracies where enslaved people fought for their freedom. In some cases, they simply sought to escape their plantations, while in others, they advocated for a revolution.
Puerto Rico abolished slavery in 1873. Cuba abolished slavery in 1886. Brazil abolished slavery in 1888. And if I'm not mistaken, I could be, don't hold me to this, but I think Brazil was the last major colony that abolished slavery. There could have been smaller ones in between, but the last major country was Brazil.
Maroon communities also existed at this time in places like Jamaica, Haiti, and elsewhere in the Caribbean. In all these cases, the struggle...
So think about it, right? Puerto Rico abolished slavery in 1873, and the United States landed in when? 1898. How many years from slavery to the United States are in between that?
Eluded archives and history books. Enslaved people's attempts to attain their freedom were not the only problem that troubled Spanish authorities. In the 1820s, separatists began organizing once again to advocate for the independence of Puerto Rico through revolutionary means. The authorities always kept a watchful eye on a group publicly known as liberals, which included María de las Mercedes Barbudo and her brother José Antonio de los Reyes, Juan Nepomuceno Otero, the priest Juan Abreu, the Spanish lieutenant Manuel Suárez del Solar, the deputy Demetrio O'Daly, and the Puerto Rican lieutenant Matías Escute. The liberals were members of the Puerto Rican elite, with contacts throughout the island and abroad. Some were arrested while María de las Mercedes Barbudo was exiled to Cuba and later spent time in Venezuela, where she is said to have known Simón Bolívar, later celebrated as the liberator of the Americas for his military role in the independence of various Latin American countries. Barbudo's group were not the only Puerto Ricans agitating for revolution. In 1822, another liberal group from Puerto Rico's Western District sent an invitation to Guillermo Lafayette Ducodrey Holstein, a veteran of Bolívar's army in Venezuela, asking him to organize an expedition to fight for Puerto Rico's independence. After a crushing defeat in Venezuela, Holstein had moved to the island of Curaçao. He was studying French and piano when he received the invitation to liberate Puerto Rico, something Latin American revolutionaries had openly advocated for more than once. He accepted and moved to Philadelphia to garner financial support for the expedition. There, he recruited businessmen eager to begin trade with an independent Puerto Rico. He also assembled an army of 200 to 400 men to fight. The plan was to invade through the town of Arecibo and then move to the city of Mayagüez, which would become the military headquarters for the Republic of Boricua. Preparations were cut short. In 1822, a new military governor, Miguel de la Torre,
Really quick, there might be more in-depth and better books out there, but this is one of the books for me. I feel like it fills in a lot of missing components that I haven't learned before. And even if I've learned it before, I feel like this book breaks it down to individuals where we can all kind of connect the pieces of the puzzles together without throwing too many things at one time. Again, when I advocate for books, I'm not saying these books are the end all be all. There's going to be books that I bring up here that's going to be different books on the same topic or teaching from different perspectives. So when I put books up here, please, I'm just sharing my favorite books with you guys. Things that, intrigue me, the things that, enlighten me. The way I think and the way I comprehend history and the way I see things might not be how everybody else does it. But when I share the information with you guys, it's because these are books that I've listened to prior, that I really like the content information. And if it's not a book that I've listened to and I'm listening to the first time with you guys, I'll let you guys know. Yo, listen, I haven't heard this book, so we got to keep the F1s locked and loaded because I don't know what's coming. But other than that, like I said, when I share these books, we got to be able to listen to different history. This is not the only book I have on Puerto Rico. I got a whole little library right here. I got maybe 6-7 books just on Puerto Rico history. So this is not the end all be all when it comes to Puerto Rican history, but this is a good chapter in Puerto Rican history, if you feel me.
Island. Simón Bolívar's army had recently expelled Spanish troops from Venezuela, and De la Torre had been one of those defeated in the Battle of Carabobo, 1822. Haunted by this shameful...
What's my favorite book that I shared this year? Did I read that right? Your favorite book shared this year. My favorite book shared this year. I know I'm gonna get back into the book. I know I'm stalling right now, but I think my favorite book that I shared this year. Oh man, I don't know. I really do it by topics because I got books by topics, right? Because when I like certain, I think it would have to be this one, but is this one with an American history Cuba, because it's written in the same style. It starts from the indigenous people all the way until Spanish colonization, all the way up to the revolutions, and then the present day, well, sort of kind of maybe off by like 10, 15, 20 years or so, given when it was written. But it kind of gives you the full scope of the history of the lands. And I honestly wish there would be more books, and maybe I haven't came across them, but more books on other places when it gives you the full scope of history. I mean, I know you can't cover everything in a book, but when somebody could give you a full scope from beginning all the way until current times, I think that gives people a broader perspective of what's going on. Because when you only talk about a specific period of time, you leave gaps and room for error to not really comprehend if you're going into when you're going to study something for the first time. So when you go to study something for the first time, for me, books that cover a broad base of the entire history, but gives you room to go into deep diving, for me, those are the best books, for real, for real. And again, I don't know, I'm not the end all be all. I don't know everything. I'm not a professor. I'm a high school dropout, so I'm just sharing what I come across and what I've consumed within my journey of life. I'm just sharing with you guys.
The governor ruled Puerto Rico ruthlessly. Shortly after his arrival, he ordered the persecution and arrest of those deemed subversives, among them the Barbudos, Escute, and others. Deputy O'Daly was forced into exile in St. Thomas. The revolution's strategists were all imprisoned or exiled. Rumors of Holstein's upcoming invasion, leaked by contacts in Philadelphia, also reached the governor's office. Spanish authorities moved forces to the town of Añasco, where the expedition was set to land. But Holstein never arrived in Puerto Rico. He set sail from the United States to the island of St. Bartholomew, but the expedition was hit by a storm. When he arrived in Curaçao, his ship was on the verge of sinking. Pressured by the Spanish crown, Dutch authorities in Curaçao arrested him before he could sail to Puerto Rico. Holstein's failed revolution was Governor Miguel de la Torre's welcome to the archipelago. His time in office, 1822 to 37, was consumed with worry about Haiti, as had been the case with previous administrations. And after 1821, another specter began haunting the Spanish in the Caribbean, Simón Bolívar. Puerto Rican authorities paid careful attention to a congress that took place in Panama in June 1826. There, Bolivar proposed the creation of a federation of nations, a plan that ultimately was not approved. The Congress also discussed the possibility of creating a military expedition composed of forces from Gran Colombia and Mexico to fight for independence in Puerto Rico. Those plans were later abandoned. Meanwhile, in Mexico, Independence generals Jose Antonio Paez and Jose Antonio Valero.
If I'm not mistaken, right, and I think of my research and my little studies when I was listening to this book, when I first listened to it, I went into a little deep dive just with the Simon Boulevard and the alliances and his treaties. And if I'm not mistaken, I think in Venezuela around that time they had the Puerto Rican Revolutionary Committee. That has nothing to do with the one that started later on down the line during the revolution in Puerto Rico. It was a separate committee that they had for people who fled from Puerto Rico trying to seek help and seek alliances to be able to help liberate Puerto Rico. But they had, and this is why I say when you study history and you go down this rabbit hole, you can see a lot of our ancestors, our revolutionary figures, they didn't believe in dividing the struggle amongst oppressed people. They believed in unifying. Like, every revolution, especially at that time, that was happening globally, was effective with the help and inspirations of others. And that's what we got to understand, too. Everything's about situations and circumstances. We can't just look at things from a one perspective point of view and feel like we can always single a situation out. Nah, there's nuances to it. It's multifaceted. Just because you tell a story or you see it from one perspective, you got to look at it from the different perspectives. Just because those are your options, you got to look at everybody that was involved in that and look at their different type of options.
We're organizing an army of about 25,000 men.
All right, I'm gonna let this play out. And this is the last thing I'm gonna say, right? When we study history, and we're really trying to get an understanding of why we in the situations that we in. I would give advice when studying the history, right? Because this is what I have to do for myself. We have to be able to separate our emotions just through the studying process. It doesn't mean don't feel no type of way about it, none of that. But to get a full scope on the historical dynamics of what we're dealing with today, when studying this historical shit that we went through, remove our emotions for a minute, get a better understanding, because our feelings can cloud our judgment on how to move in the future. That's all I'm saying.
Fight in Cuba and Puerto Rico. This war did not materialize either, but it nonetheless terrified colonial authorities. Rumors circulated about Bolivar's possible invasion in January 1827, March 1828, and February 1829. The fears of invasion dissipated after the Gran Colombia-Peru War, 1828-29, the separation of Venezuela, Ecuador, and Panama from Gran Colombia, and Bolivar's death in 1830. In this tense atmosphere, the Spanish crown once again suspended constitutional rights in 1823. Until then, Puerto Rico had been governed by two forces, a civilian governor and a military general. After that year, the position of civilian governor was abolished, giving way to rule by military men given dictatorial power by the Spanish crown. Recognizing the powers bestowed on him, Miguel de la Torre passed the Bando de Policía y Buen Gobierno, the Police and Good Government Proclamation, which sought to shape, control, and dominate social relations in Puerto Rico. The Bando was composed of dozens of ordinances regulating mobility, labor, and space. After it was approved on January 2nd, 1824, it was read aloud in the streets of every municipality. Town mayors also received a copy and were instructed to implement it immediately. Some ordinances demanded that mayors inform authorities of any foreigners or strangers passing through their towns. It also forced them to create daily logs of information about everything that happened in their municipality. Residents could not admit strangers into their homes without the approval of the town's mayor. The island was put under an evening curfew and private meetings were banned.
This is what I was talking about before, how they put it on complete lockdown. It was like their version of their martial law. Because, like I said, especially the influences of what Haiti was doing.
Lastly, the bando prohibited vagrancy, including young people who were unemployed. Those found guilty were arrested and sent to serve in the Spanish army. The document was a response to Haiti and Bolivar, as well as a testament to the circulation of separatist ideas in Puerto Rico.
The book said it. I'm just saying, the book said it. I'm correlating it, and the book said it.
Miguel de la Torre sought to surveil and control the laboring masses, while also catering to planters and merchants. He granted special licenses to slave-holding planters to sell enslaved people even when the world markets were closed. In 1823, Spain signed the Anglo-Spanish Treaty with England to abolish the slave trade. But during de la Torre's administration, more enslaved people arrived in Puerto Rico than ever before. The state's repressive mechanism, notes historian Fernando Pico, also made it possible for many planters to take out mortgages that were increased by interest rates which were, at least in theory, illegal. The ports, recently opened in accordance with new reforms, received copious merchandise, and de la Torre's government purged the Caribbean area of pirates. While some enjoyed the fleeting sense of prosperity, many suffered from de la Torre's harsh policies. Peasants who owned little or no property, salaried workers, and artisans were also targeted by his government. Despite his authoritarian rule, de la Torre is remembered for his policies around public celebrations. He is known to have ruled with the 3 B's: baile, botella, y baraja, dancing, drinking, and gambling. Hoping to quell revolutionary ideas from the Americas then circulating in Puerto Rico, he sought to entertain the masses. The apparent fiscal prosperity that Puerto Rico was enjoying depended on draconian labor laws and the exploitation of enslaved people. In response to a conspiracy by enslaved people discovered in Ponce in 1826, de la Torre passed new regulations. Building on a previous royal decree of 1789, the governor ordered the surveillance and monitoring of black people traveling beyond their plantations. He also ordered enslaved people to be locked in at night. The government offered rewards to enslaved individuals who uncovered conspiracies or plans for insurrection. Ultimately, the regulations were meant to dissuade enslaved people from challenging their oppressive conditions. They didn't work. The following decade witnessed at least 5 other conspiracies in Puerto Rico. De la Torre established foundations for other oppressive labor regulations enacted by governors Miguel López de Baños, 1837-41, Juan Prim y Prats, 1847-48, and Juan de la Pezuela, 1848-51. After the 1848 revolutions in Europe, the French government abolished slavery in Martinique and Guadeloupe on April 29. The enslaved people of Martinique did not wait for official news to arrive and started an insurrection that eventually reached other Caribbean islands. Alarmed, Governor Prim y Prats sent a battalion to Santa Cruz with 500 soldiers and 2 pieces of artillery. The insurrection was quelled, but he feared that it would spread in Puerto Rico. To that end, he passed the Bando contra la Raza Negra, proclamation against the black race.
Listen.
During these decades, what we now call anti-blackness became ensconced in laws that would have a lingering effect on black people's livelihoods for centuries to come. Prim y Prats's proclamation targeted black people, freed or enslaved. According to Article 1, if a black person committed any crime, they would be tried and convicted by a military judge. The second article affirmed white people's superiority in the eyes of the law. If a black man harmed a white person, even if it was justified and in self-defense, they would be found guilty. If a black person insulted, threatened, or mistreated a white person, they would be condemned to 5 years in prison if they were enslaved, and judged accordingly if they were free. Those who owned enslaved people were also given the power to kill them if they sought to revolt. Prim y praxis dictatorial impulses, which also included extrajudicial executions of bandits, caused him to be removed from his charge by the Spanish crown. His successor, Juan de la Pezuela, abolished the bando contra la raza negra while exhorting enslaved black people to be submissive and to submit to their condition. The governor also moved to regulate labor by decreeing the Reglamento de Jornaleros, Day Laborers Regulation, on June 11, 1849. It mandated that all young men be employed. Furthermore, workers were required to carry a logbook issued by the municipal judge. In that logbook, his employer noted information such as where the worker was employed and how much he was paid. If someone was stopped and surprised without their logbook, they were forced to pay a fine and work on public construction at half their usual salary. Known as the logbook regime, the system was a way of controlling the island's labor population. It complemented Governor de la Pezuela's police proclamation, which curtailed mobility between towns, banned private meetings, and prescribed an evening curfew of 10 o'clock. These proclamations and regulations made de la Pezuela highly unpopular among the laboring masses. He also won the distrust of the San Juan elite by publicly noting that Puerto Rican society crawls clumsy and sluggishly without more excitement than carnal appetites, with a vagabond generation, without faith, without religion, and without thought, at the inauguration of the royal audience in 1849. While de la Pezuela complained and looked down on Puerto Ricans, a new generation of intellectuals and revolutionaries were thinking hard about what it meant to be Puerto Rican in the first place. The seeds of revolution. Spain opened Puerto Rico to foreign markets in the 19th century, but it failed to create an infrastructure for the colony to prosper economically. The U.S. Civil War had generated demand for sugar from foreign markets, particularly because of the blockade the North imposed on southern states. When the war ended and those states rejoined the Atlantic markets, Puerto Rico's economy contracted severely. But that wasn't the only contraction that took place in the 19th century. As Salvador Brau, one of the leading historians of the period, has noted, the system of enslaved labor had produced enough wealth for planters to send their sons to study abroad.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about it, right? Because I told you guys my two favorite books in this genre, right, would be this book and American History Cuba. And I'm just, as they're talking about this, right, they're talking about like the Civil War in the United States and how that caused like sugar production to shift because of the, sanctions and the blockades to the South. And I'm looking at Puerto Rico's perspective of how that history is playing out as we can listen to it. But when I listen to the Cuba book, you can also hear the other different nuances, right? Where Cuba was kind of like with the plantation owners. Because if people understand, you had interest in the United States before the Civil War in the Caribbean islands for other materials and other natural resources and agriculture. So when you go back at the Civil War, you go back to Cuba, you had U.S. interests, right? U.S. corporations who had interests over there, even though the U.S. was very small at the time. It wasn't what it is today. But understanding that a lot of people in Cuba also relied on the business transactions with the United States to keep their slave labor up and running. So you even have that nuance where you had the white tea presenting Cubanos fighting for the Confederacy, and then you have, the other Cubans who are fighting, more with the Union. So you actually had portions of both sides actually go to the United States and physically fight on both sides of the war. But that's to show you, like, we forget that what they deem Latin America has white folks too. You know what I'm saying? It's here in the United States, they want to jumble us all together and make us forget that we have class, we have racism, we have all of these nuances, same thing as here in the United States, over there. So that's just something I'm just, different perspective, same situation, hearing it out. This is why I have my problem with the term Latino and Latina or Hispanic, and it doesn't just remove the identity of the individual, it also undermines the racism, the classism, and all the systematic injustices as people as color coming from those places go through. And that's a term that was created here. And I feel like if we're going to utilize that word, if people want to say, oh, we Latino, they want to fight for it, because I see that shit a lot in here. Everybody want to fight for it. It's only relevant if what we deem Latin American countries really have that Latin unification. It doesn't mean nothing just by diasporans here in the United States classifying themselves under one label to unify against a racist system. I get it. But on the broader perspective, we don't unify as Latin countries where it matters, because that's what leaves us vulnerable. What leaves us vulnerable is that we don't have a relationship with our neighbors. We can't rely on our neighbors. We can't rely on the people who are more culturally connected to us, because they've created that hectic dynamic that we're battling each other. And it's not to like go off topic, but I was listening to it a lot lately, and it's like, I'm not opposed to unification, right? But if we're going to use this term, we can't just use it here in the United States. It has to be a movement that really means something. It is not just to defend ourselves through racism, bro. It's to defend ourselves from colonial superpowers. And that's what we're forgetting. So like I said, I got an issue with these terms, but that's my own personal shit. People go back and forth with me if they want or they don't want, and you can have some ignorant people say, oh, just because he's from New York. Man, listen, Jersey feel the same way, Philadelphia feel the same way. You go to anywhere where Puerto Ricans up north is, they tell you the same thing. You go anywhere with any other Latino group, they tell you the same thing. It's not that we don't want unification, it's that we all come through here through our own struggles. Like, all of us don't have the same status here in the United States. All of us don't go through the same process here in the United States. We all come through here differently. We all impacted differently. Are we all at the bottom of the barrel? Yes, sir. That I will not deny. We are all at the bottom of the barrel. But the way we got there is different. So the way we attack it is different. So if we all trying to attack it the same way, you're going to undermine the different struggles of what these individual groups are really fighting and going through. That's all I'm saying. I mean, grouping people based off the language. Do you know how? Imagine that. Imagine if you group the United States, Canadians, people from England, people from Jamaica, people from the U.S. version, all because they speak English, so you're going to categorize them all under one label? There's cultural similarities. We were all colonized. They all have that colonized, aspect there. But we won't do that because it doesn't make sense, right? So when we look at it from that perspective, let me get to the book. I'm chatting.
A generation of young men arrived in Paris, Madrid, and Michigan to study law or medicine. They also learned about liberalism, arriving back in the Caribbean with fervent abolitionist ideas, or in the words of historian Silvia Álvarez Curvelo, Puerto Rico's first modernist discourse. In Puerto Rico, a sense of nationhood or belonging to something other than the Spanish Empire did not begin in the 19th century. As previously noted, the category of puertorriqueño had been used since the early 1700s. The criollo category also emerged in the Americas to differentiate those who had been born in the Iberian Peninsula, referred to as peninsulares, from those born in Puerto Rico. These identity categories also carried power, as those in the upper echelons of the social structure were often peninsulares. Yet the multiple attempts of Puerto Ricans to become independent allow us to see the limits of Spanish loyalty in the colony. Uncovering the origins of Puerto Ricanidad might prove an impossible endeavor. It is important to note, however, that Puerto Rico began to be imagined and theorized through the world of letters. History also became a tool for affirming nationality in these years, as scholars sought to locate the foundations of the society they were living in and trying to comprehend. Puerto Rico's indigenous peoples became a recurring theme in contemporaneous literary production, and intellectuals also began creating national canons that included the 18th century painter José Campeche and Puerto Rico's first representative in the Spanish courts, Ramón Power y Giralt. Two members of this intellectual and political generation were Ramón Emeterio Betances and Segundo Ruiz Belvis. They met in Paris, where Betances studied medicine and Ruiz Belvis finished his law studies. Weary of the colonial condition and with the sharpest of minds, they began working toward the independence of Puerto Rico. Both died in exile, but their work was not in vain. In 1868...
Really quick, since they brought up Ramón Emeterio Betances, this is a good book. I got this down in Puerto Rico. Puerto Rican Revolt for Independence, El Grito de Lares by Olga Jimenez. This is actually a good book. I actually have another book by Olga Jimenez, which I think is Puerto Rico, what is it called? A Documented History, which is a lot lengthier than this. But this is a good book, too. It tells you about the story of the Grito de Lares, and it tells you a little bit about Ramón Emeterio Betances. It's in Spanish, but it's a good read, very good read.
The revolution they had helped organize took place in Lares, Puerto Rico. The Lares Revolution failed in its objectives, but success cannot solely be measured through military and political rubrics. Lares became a symbol of national affirmation that is remembered and celebrated even today.
Ooh, that was a good chapter there. That was a good chapter. I got to get ready to go because I got some things that I got to take care of. But everybody, please don't forget, go over to YouTube, hit subscribe on Afro Taino 88. We are also live on there just in case anybody wants to catch up on whatever content that they missed prior, or you want to go see some of the other books we have up there. The library is only going to continue to grow as we continue to keep going live, and we don't know where we're going to be at by the end of next month. So just do me a favor, if you guys want to follow my content, want to keep up with the book club, just go to YouTube, hit subscribe, go check out whenever you have some free time, go look at some of the stuff in the archives, and again, stay positive and productive. And like I said, don't engage into tearing your own community down. If you don't agree with somebody, you don't like what somebody doing, unless it's impacting your community personally or impacting you, don't feel entitled enough to go walk in somebody's space and tell them what to do. Stay positive, productive. I'll catch you guys later. 1.